thank you all for coming this evening. I know a lot of you at least, but I'm Glenn Marangelo, and I'm the development director and one of the founders of the Missoula Butterfly House. And so this evening, if you've come before, you know what to expect. I'm just going to jump right into it. And that's not the presentation, it's the traditional bug jokes. And these are fresh ones, newly emerged, as we were saying. So what creature is smarter than a talking parrot? A spelling bee. Why was the mother firefly so sad? Because her children weren't that bright. And the last one, why do you find so few insects on military bases? Because of the strict no-fly zones. All right. It's amazing what you find online. So a lot of you have probably been in this room before for either Bugs and Brews or some other presentation or a conference that our county partners might have put on, the Missoula Conservation District, but this room gets a lot of use. And so that's why we often need to jump on it when a date that's available and our speaker's availability coincide, and we need to get things in the calendar really quickly. But of all days to schedule a lecture that provides you with the opportunity to enjoy a beer at the same time, you might say that the luck of the Irish was with us. So happy St. Paddy's Day, everyone. So that provides me with a really perfect lead-in just to thank our incredible partners at DraftWorks. I don't believe any of them are here tonight because when I picked up the beer at 12:30, they were already pretty full. So it seems like it's a busy day for DraftWorks. But they've been amazing ever since we started this lecture series. Hard to believe it, but 11 years ago, DraftWorks has been generously donating the beer, and now the beer and hard seltzer. But beyond the beverages, they've been just incredible partners. They've made donations to us. The staff is always incredibly enthusiastic and supportive. We usually show up at least once a year for a little bug meet and greet at the brewery. It's more like our babysitting opportunity while the parents enjoy themselves and we deal with the kids for a while. But it's good for all ages to check out the bugs. But they're just have been so incredibly supportive. Not only do they provide the beverages for Bugs and Brews, but they also supply the beverages for our roosting hours, which is kind of an adult night at the Butterfly House, minus the lecture, but you get the opportunity just to check everything out. We usually have a themed activity or something that else is going on each month. And the next one is coming up on April 2nd. So a big St. Paddy's Day cheers to DraftWorks. Thanks so much. And of course, I want to give a shout out to Missoula Community Access Television, who are recording tonight's lecture, and we're thrilled to be working with them. And this has been, I think we had most of last season and every lecture of this 2025-26 season recorded thanks to a media assistance grant that was donated to the Missoula Butterfly House and Insectarian. So if you wanted to check out some of the past lectures, you can go to their YouTube page and just search for Missoula Butterfly House, and you'll get a number of them. So as I hope all of you saw in the email message from yesterday, unfortunately our speaker for this evening, Michelle, and is it Toshak, I believe, but with the Montana Bumblebee Atlas, I was super excited for her presentation, as I'm sure most of you were, but she had an emergency pop up that she couldn't come here this evening. And it might not be, we might wait until next time, about this time next year, to have her come back, because it's a perfect time of year for her to talk about that project and hopefully get some volunteers engaged in it. But we'll definitely have her back at some point. As I hope you also saw in your email, that means that for tonight you are stuck with me. It just so happens that last week I gave a presentation on early season Montana butterflies as part of UM's Molly program. And so it's still kind of fresh in my head, and so it worked out well rather than just having to cancel things. Because we literally learned about this probably at about 4 in the afternoon yesterday, so we just had to figure out, okay, what do we do? And so thank you for sticking with us. And I think that I'll introduce myself. No, I guess I don't have to do that. That's awkward, of course. But we'll just jump right into it. So early season butterflies, I don't know if you grabbed the handout on your way in, but today's presentation is going to introduce you to these early season butterflies. Butterflies in general in the beginning, but more specifically, we'll narrow things down and we'll end up talking about 8 specific species in western Montana that we're going to focus on today. And these are species that you can see well before the snow has fully melted. And that sentence wouldn't have made any sense until about a week ago. So now we have a little bit of snow, but also well before there's any flowers in bloom at all. So my goal for today is not really to have you walk out of here knowing exactly how to identify all of these by sight, because some of them are pretty difficult. But what I want to do is provide the framework and introduce the tools to help you identify each of these species, which also kind of translates into learning about other butterflies as the season comes along, because there's certain things amongst all different groups of butterflies that you really need to focus on to determine one from the other, and some of them can be really difficult. If you're new to butterfly identification, hopefully that today is going to provide you with a really good starting point. The reason I wanted to talk about these 8 species is, number one, because they've got a really remarkable life cycle, which we'll go through. But number 2, this is it. Until we hit about probably the beginning of April to mid-April, these are primarily the butterflies that you're going to see. We're going to have one add-on at the end that is one that well, I won't give it away, but there's an extra one we'll tag on at the end. But this is it. So this is a great place to start if you're not familiar or comfortable with identifying butterflies, because if you go out, and I think tomorrow and Thursday are supposed to be in the upper 60s, especially Thursday. You get 2 good days in a row where it's warm. I guarantee if you go to the right places, you're going to be seeing these butterflies out and about. And so this is it. These are the 8 that you have the potential of seeing. So it's a great starting point to get comfortable in how to identify butterflies. So as I mentioned, butterfly identification can be tricky. And there are there's an estimated 17,500 species of butterflies in the world. In the United States, there's about 750 species. This beautiful example of a dusky blue ground streak, which I had seen in Texas like 3 or 4 years ago. But if we narrow it down to Montana, there's about 200 species in Montana, and they always say about, because there could be one that was missed in all these surveys. And also, as time goes on and our climate's changing a little bit, there could be species that hadn't been able to come up here before that are suddenly able to make it. So I think that about is usually a good thing to include in saying, instead of saying definitively. So, and thanks to surveys done by Will Curling, I don't know if anybody remembers Will, he was around for a long time, still around luckily, but he's on the East Coast. And the late Byron Weber, who our classroom is named after, we know that there's about 129 species here in Missoula County. And we've got amazing butterflies here in Missoula County, and hopefully these are a lot of ones that you've seen. We've got a variety of different swallowtail species. This is the two-tailed swallowtail. We've actually got about 9 different species of swallowtails. Some that are not yellow, some that are kind of white in color, but we've got a lot of swallowtails that you'll see. Other things like this pink-edged sulfur, there's, I think, about 5 species of sulfurs that you could potentially see. And they are really difficult to identify as well. I mean, they still stump me a lot of times until I kind of brush up on it from the prior year. But you'll see sulfurs probably starting to fly in maybe late May, early June or so. Around that same time, the common alpines start to make their appearance. Arctic skipper. It's one of our earliest skippers that will emerge. It's really colorful and it's got this really bold patterning, so it's a little easier to identify than the other skippers, because we've got like 16 different species of skippers here in western Montana, and a lot of them are divided by the season, so they're not all out at once, but this is one that's a little easier. The Melissa blues, probably our showiest blue butterfly. I know anybody that's been out hiking, you walk along, and usually on the edge of puddles, you'll see like these little butterflies come up, and you'll see the blue. When they land, their wings fold up, and they're not blue on the underside, and it's that underside that you really want to be able to get a look at to tell the species apart. If you're really good, you can probably tell the species from the top side, but that's beyond me at this point. But we've got about 12 different species of blues depending on the season. Purplish copper, and really small, as you can tell, butterfly. And it's really interesting because they will start showing up about mid-April and will be flying until maybe mid-May or maybe into June. And then they make a second appearance in the late summer and into the early fall. So there's not too many butterflies that we actually get two emergences of throughout the year. And then I just threw this Siva juniper hairstreak in because it's just a really beautiful butterfly. And this was out at the bison range down along Mission Creek. It's a good area to be able to see. There's a lot of junipers in that area, which they need. So in order to really have an appreciation for these butterflies and the ones that we're going to talk about, I just wanted to go over the butterfly life cycle. And this is, hopefully it's not completely new to everybody, but all butterflies will go through complete metamorphosis. So they go through the egg, the larva or the caterpillar stage, the chrysalis or the pupal stage, and the adult butterfly. And so after mating, a female butterfly will lay her eggs on a host plant or host plants depending on the species, because some species like the monarch butterfly are super specific. The only thing that they will lay their eggs on and the caterpillars will eat is milkweed. But then you get other things like this painted lady butterfly that is very much a generalist that can lay, I don't know how many different host species it has. But this is an interesting butterfly that it always seems like when we see them, we don't see them every year because they overwinter down in northwestern Mexico. And depending on what happens there with the vegetation and their population, on years when the population's really good, they push in big numbers north. And we usually start seeing them about Mother's Day. That's what I always equate that with. On other years where their populations are not good, we don't see a single one here in Montana. So it's a species that it's kind of a feast or famine type thing. But I mean, there's been years where they were just streaming through my backyard on 11th Street, just in, I'm not out of town. They just, they're on kind of like a rampage some years. So the larval stage. So when the caterpillars emerge, they're tiny, as you can see. This happens to be a monarch caterpillar. And they are pretty much eating and pooping machines. They're going to grow a ton. They're going to shed their skin 4 different times, passing through 5 stages called instars. In about 2 to 4 weeks, they can grow 2,000 times to almost 3,000 times their original size. Then they get ready to enter the pupal stage. And so with butterflies, they do what they kind of call the J position. This is a backwards J in a certain way, but they spin a little silken pad and attach their hind legs and hang upside down. And then they'll shed their skin for the final time. So this is kind of cool if you haven't seen what happens here. So they shed their skin one more time, and then underneath that, magically, is the formation of the chrysalis, which is essentially at that point their exoskeleton. So, and this is a monarch that we're looking at here, and this is a really beautiful monarch chrysalis. So about 1 to 3 weeks, if everything goes well and there's no parasitism, there were no parasitic wasp or anything like that, hopefully you'll get an adult butterfly to emerge. And as with all butterflies, they emerge, their wings are kind of crinkled up, and they pump fluid from their bodies into their wings and basically inflate their wings. And once their wings are dry, they're ready to kind of take off and start the next stage of their life cycle. So the average adult butterfly will only live about 1 to 3 weeks. And you might see a certain butterfly out in the field for maybe even 2 months, but they're not all emerging at the same time. You're seeing kind of like a rolling wave of emergence. And so the individual butterfly is probably only living 1 to 3 weeks. There might be some that live a little longer, but that's usually about their lifespan. So think about the process of going from an egg to an adult. And if you're like me, you like everything to be smooth and very linear. So you like to think of, okay, they go from the egg, they go from the larva to the pupa, and you get an adult. But in Montana, we've got a little something called winter. And so that definitely puts a little pause in their cycle, and every butterfly has a different way of dealing with winter. So in terms of how they do it, the majority of butterflies, we'll go back to this, and we'll go back to this a couple times, but the majority of butterflies and moths overwinter in the larval stage or the caterpillar stage. And they're actually able to build up in their bodies an antifreeze, which we're going to get back to in talking about our butterflies in a little bit, that their body can really freeze solid, but that antifreeze is in the cells, so the cell structure remains intact. So when they thaw out, everything's still intact, and they can survive that way. Overwintering as a pupa or in the chrysalis is the next most common. There's species like the monarch, the painted lady that we just talked about, the West Coast lady. They're ones that migrate. So when things get bad, they get the heck out of town and they spend the winter someplace else. That's their strategy. Our early season butterflies, which here are the 8 that we're going to talk about, are really unique because these butterflies overwinter as an adult butterfly. And believe it or not, depending on the year, you can start seeing them on the wing as early as mid-February. But this year was crazy because it was so incredibly warm. So I'm not sure of the exact species, but I'm pretty sure it was the California tortoiseshell. We got, somebody sent a picture in December, somebody sent a picture in January. I saw one out here in January. As soon as February started hitting, we were getting more reports. And now, aside from this little blip that we had here, we should really start seeing a big emergence of all these butterflies pretty shortly. And so the mourning cloak, let me just see where I am. Okay. The mourning cloak, it's all over the United States. It's probably the easiest one to identify from the rest of these. Mourning cloaks are just gorgeous, and if you catch, the light catches that coloration that covers most of their wings. It's this super unique, like mahogany, chestnutty, brown, little purpley color. The outer band is an incredible gold color. When they are older and they've aged a lot, sometimes that band can be almost white, so don't let that fool you. But that inner band of black with those beautiful bluish purple spots, it's a gorgeous butterfly. We've got our tortoiseshells. We've got the Milbert's tortoiseshell on the top, the California tortoiseshell in the middle, and the Compton tortoiseshell on the bottom. And we're going to go through all of these, so I'll just go through this quickly. And then we've got all of our 4 species of commas or angle wings. So the green comma on the top, the satyr comma, the hoary comma, and the aureus comma. And so I just want to say that this is just western Montana. If you went to central and eastern Montana, there's a gray comma. And if you're in very eastern Montana, you might be able to see what's called a question mark. It's due to the patterning on it. But so there's 2 other commas that you could potentially see in the eastern part of the state. So to better understand how this life cycle is possible, we'll talk about 2 things. How are we seeing adult butterfly now at about this time of year, and what these butterflies are eating. So in explaining this, again, I want to go back to this life cycle chart here, and it makes sense for me to start from the egg. And so for these butterflies, by May or into early June, once the plants that the caterpillars really need to feed on have leafed out, the adults have laid their eggs, and within, Within a week or so, the caterpillars will emerge and begin eating. The larval or caterpillar stage, within 3 to 4 weeks, the caterpillars have grown tremendously, and they'll start to form the chrysalis, beginning their last phase of transformation to an adult butterfly. The pupal stage, they'll be in the pupal stage again for 1 to 3 weeks, and so the adult butterflies of these species can start emerging as early as mid-July, which is on the early side, but by late July and certainly into August and late August, this is when a lot of this next generation is emerging. But there's 2 other important parts of their life cycle that this does not address. And so that's a summer siesta and the winter hibernation. So these butterflies emerge pretty early in the summer, and they're going to be living throughout the winter ahead. So one of their strategies, aside from starting to build up some of their reserves, is they chill out. They take it easy. They find places to rest and hide, and basically just stay away from predators and things like that. So they kind of take like a little summer siesta. This is actually a picture of a mourning cloak. The underside is very, very different than the top side. But I was doing a butterfly survey up in Condon, Montana, and I saw this mourning cloak flying, and it went towards this tree, and then all of a sudden it just disappeared. So I walked over to the tree, and there's a big opening at the base of the tree, and then about like a foot in there, I stuck my camera in, there's the butterfly hanging out. So that was probably one of the spots that it chooses to kind of hang out and just rest a lot. Usually by late August into mid-September and even into mid-October, they're out and they're more active, and they're eating to build up their reserves. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. The other thing, winter hibernation, by the time we hit November, for the most part, and again, this year was a little different, but these butterflies have pretty much disappeared. The colder temperatures have really taken over, and they're kind of hunkered down in a very similar spot to where they were hanging out in the summer. So it could be in a tree cavity, under loose bark that's on a tree, or under some leaf litter. And there's a big word for their spot that they choose. It's called a hibernaculum, is where they're spending the winter. But in order to survive winter, they need to be able to do something that other butterflies can't, and prevent themselves from freezing to death. Or I should say other adult butterflies, because we talked about how some do that in the caterpillar stage. So how do they survive these freezing temperatures? It's called cryopreservation, and it's really the key to their survival. The problem with the freezing temperatures, as I mentioned, is the ice forms in the cell structure, and that just destroys the cells, and that would kill the butterfly. So this antifreeze helps prevent that, and it lets them essentially freeze solid without dying. As the temperatures drop, and this is, I kind of wanted to understand if it was something they were eating that was building up these antifreezes, and the only thing I found on it is it says that as the temperatures drop, they convert stored energy into chemical cryoprotectants, so glycerol and sorbitol that prevent freezing, and they can actually withstand extreme cold down to minus 80 degrees. So, and I've been in Montana 30, I don't know how many years, 35 years. And I've seen some cold temperatures, but that's, I think they're well suited for our winters here for sure. But thanks to this antifreeze superpower, they patiently wait out the winter, and they begin flying once the temperatures allow their wing muscles to become warm enough. And they'll actually, if the temperature's just on the borderline, they can kind of shiver their muscles and increase their body temperature a little bit to take off if they want to get out there. But again, you're normally not seeing these taking flight until probably, on average, sometime in mid-February, but this year's been totally different. So they take the opportunity, when it's warm, to stretch their wings and find some food. And when the temperature turns cold again, especially at night, they're back in their hibernaculum waiting for the warmer days ahead. We got a lot of calls from people that saw them and said, what am I going to do? This poor butterfly, they felt that they needed to keep it protected and warm. But, we were like, it'll just do its thing. It'll find its place. They'll be fine. So I just said a minute ago that they stretch their wings and find some food. And so hopefully a lot of you were like, okay, food, what the heck are they eating? So because normally when we're thinking of butterflies like this Akmon blue, we're thinking of butterflies sitting at a beautiful flower and sipping nectar. But these butterflies are very different because there's no flowers out and about. And unlike most butterflies, what they're focused on, especially very early in the season, is tree sap. And so on this picture, and this was up O'Brien Creek here in Montana, in Missoula, there's a green comma on the bottom and a Compton up above that. And you could see how wet that branch is. That had been, I don't know if something else fell on it, but it damaged that branch. And as soon as if anybody knows about maple syrup production, as soon as the weather starts getting warm enough where the sap starts flowing, that's what these butterflies are taking advantage of. So areas where there's sap that they can eat. The other thing they focus on, which may not be quite as appetizing in our minds, is scat and carrion. So, and you've probably seen it if, they're like a horse pile on the trail. There's often butterflies on it because they're going for all those minerals. And very likely it might be these species that are focused on that in particular. So let's add this up. How long do these butterflies live? So let's just eliminate early July. Let's just say they're emerging in August of the past year. And they live until May or June, and I've actually seen some really battered mourning cloaks in early July of the next year. So incredibly, these butterflies are living like 9 months. And so that's way longer than the typical 1 to 3 weeks for the butterflies that kind of have their heyday in the middle of the summer. And so that's just an incredible life cycle. And when you think of how dainty and delicate a butterfly is, to realize that they're living that long and they're spending that much time at incredibly cold temperatures. So now that we know about their life cycles and how to identify the species, we're going to get into the identification. But before we do that, just for anybody that's looking to go out, I just want to talk about a couple tools for butterfly identification. Butterfly guides, identification guides. The Swift Guide to Butterflies is a great one. It's heavy. This covers all the butterflies in the United States. You can get ones that are just butterflies of the West. I would recommend, if you don't have a field guide and you're not traveling around the country and need to find out all the species that you can potentially find, get one that is just for the West. Even if it's not any lighter, you're going to spend way less time thumbing through all these species that are not even remotely close to Montana. So get a guide that's just for the West. And I meant to bring them in, but close focus binoculars. So if you like the outdoors, probably a lot of you have binoculars, but close focus is the ones that I have. If I'm looking at my toe, I can zoom in on my toe very clearly. So this allows you to see a butterfly right there and zoom in on it, because like binoculars that really have the capacity to look at a long distance, like you might really want for a Yellowstone and things like that, you're probably not getting anything that's within 15 feet in focus. And butterflies are still small, and even though you're zooming in on it, you're probably not going to see all those details that you really want to see. So if you really get into it and you need to get binoculars, get close focus. A camera, and you don't need a fancy camera. If you're into photography and got a great camera, that's awesome. But I've got a little point and shoot that has a macro feature, and I love trying to get bug pictures, but especially if you see a butterfly and you're really baffled and you just don't know what it is, try to get a picture, and then you can go back and look and use your guides. And the thing is, I like having the point and shoot because usually the butterfly is not just sitting there patiently waiting for you to take the picture. It's like if you have something that can focus super quick and just get a shot off, that's really helpful. A net, and I didn't bring my own net in, but I brought one of our nets here. You can get a lot of different butterfly nets. I would say a net is like, your last resort. It's better to try to identify them without actually capturing the butterfly. But if you are really into nets, there are nets that are like black mesh. And that it may seem counterproductive. You might think that you can't see as much. But actually there's a lot more light reflection off of the white nets. And those black nets, I can catch a butterfly, just kind of look at it through the net and then let it go, because you usually can identify it very well just by looking through the net. So if you're geeky like me, you want to get a black net. And then lastly, if you catch something and you're really baffled, I always carry around these little pop-up boxes. It's got a little zippered compartment here. You can pop the butterfly in there, zip it up. It's got a clear plastic side, and then it allows you to really look at the butterfly without handling it. You know, certain people are super comfortable handling butterflies. I'm not one of them, and I don't feel confident that I'm going to do a good job. And if you're rubbing off the scales on their wings, you're really not doing them any favor. So there's a lot of things that you can use to not get quite as handsy with them if you really need to look at them. So where and when to look? Our river corridors, the riparian areas, I looked up, the majority of these species are, the host plants are things that are in our river corridors. So a lot are willows, but cottonwoods, aspens, a few of them, nettles and currant, but those are generally things that are growing in slightly wetter areas. So definitely our river corridors. And personally for me, I've not seen nearly as much walking along the Clark Fork River, just partly because the habitat is developed around it. It's not as intact. But I think in general, the bigger the river, they may just be more spread out. I find going on smaller creeks the best places to find them. Rock Creek is a really good place. And I haven't gone up there in a while, so I'll give it up. But O'Brien Creek is fantastic. It's not like the most picturesque place to hike just along that road. You have to go up past a couple of houses. But for early season butterflies, it is amazing. It's one of the best places that I tend to go. So when we start talking about their identification, a couple things I just want to point out in terms of what we'll be talking about. Obviously, these are insects, so all insects have a head, thorax, and abdomen. And if you get confused between thorax and abdomen, I've probably said this before at a Bugs and Brews thing, but think of Thor, think of something really strong. The thorax is where the muscles for the wings and the legs come from. So that's where all their mobility comes from. The abdomen is actually where they breathe from. All insects breathe through their abdomens. But the things that we'll be talking about a little bit in terms of identification, yes, butterflies have 4 wings, but we're going to be talking about the forewings or the front wings. So we'll be talking about forewings, we'll be talking about the hind wings, and the only thing I wanted to talk about is a chevron, which is kind of like, to me, a somewhat triangular shape that you'll see on certain butterflies. Not all of them are going to have it, and that's one thing we're going to be looking for. But that's one term that I will use, and I just kind of wanted to point that out, and that refers to a specific mark on the butterfly. And the other thing I will say, when we get into our identification, there's terms that probably nobody else uses that I'll be using because they make sense to me, and hopefully they'll make sense to you. Chevron, okay. Okay, so our 8 species. Again, here they are, and we're going to go through each one. And we'll start with the easiest one. So we'll start with the mourning cloak. And as I talked about before, I mean, it's really one of the more easily identified early season butterflies just because of that incredible color. They're also, with most of the early season butterflies, they're almost twice the size. They're a little bit larger. State butterfly of Montana, if anybody didn't know that, that's the mourning cloak. And I kind of pointed out the features before. And this is the easiest one. So hopefully everyone will know the mourning cloak if you see the mourning cloak. Our tortoiseshells. So we've got the Milbert's tortoiseshell, the California, and the Comptons. And we'll go through each of these individually. On a normal year when we're kind of getting normal weather, to me it seems like I always see the Milbert's tortoiseshell is the first one I generally see, and I'm not sure why. Maybe their coloration or there's something about them that enable them to fly when the others are still kind of hunkered down. The Compton tortoiseshell for the Missoula area is not very common at all. I think I've only probably seen about 6 of those ever. So it's not a very common butterfly, but we'll include it because it is here. So the Milbert's tortoiseshell, and I'll see if I can get this, I'll play it once and I'll see if I can get it to stop when I want it to stop. So there's the video, the sound is not working on this, and the video is very choppy. But this was March 7th, I think, one year. So, and I think it was the first butterfly that I had seen that year. Now I'm going to try to just pause it when it opens its wings. Whoops, that didn't work. Okay, there we go. Because you don't generally see them with their wings out like that. They're usually with their wings up. And this one is just cool. So if you get to see the tops of their wings, it's very different than the other tortoiseshells. And the thing I love about this one, it looks like a cat to me. It's got cat's eyes. Really cool little butterfly. They're very fast flyers. But that coloration, again, it's got that orange on the outside. It's got that kind of yellow on the inside, which again, when they're older, can kind of fade to like a whitish color. But that's our Milbert's tortoiseshell. What else did I want to say about them? Yeah, a little bit more colorful, smaller, and again, one of the ones that we tend to see a little bit earlier. The California tortoiseshell. So when we get into the commas, the California tortoiseshell and the Compton are a little more similar in appearance to the commas, but they lack the comma on the underside of the wings, which we'll take a look at in just a little bit. But the things to point out on this, note the white spots near on the top of the wings here. In the forewing, the hind wing, just look, there's really nothing going on in the hind wing. It's got a black border here, but there's only like a couple spots on the very tail end. So they don't have a lot of markings as far as most of the ones that we're going to be looking at go. The tortoiseshells, the Compton tortoiseshell and the California are probably a little bit bigger than the commas we'll be looking at. The only thing I'd further mention about the California tortoiseshell is last year there was I think they call it an eruption, essentially. So what happened is there was years and years of really awesome conditions specifically for California tortoiseshells that built up. And there was an emergence that it blows the average year away. There's millions and millions of these butterflies from central Idaho. We had reports of huge numbers of butterflies from Libby all the way down into the missions. And even like they will migrate elevationally. They don't migrate out of the area, but in the summer they're a little bit higher up, and when they go to, they come down to kind of the river bottoms for overwintering. And so last year, I don't know, I can't remember, it must have been September or something like that. There were tons of them out in the garden here, and just driving around town when I stopped at any traffic light, you'd always see a couple tortoiseshells just flying right by. There was tons of them even in Missoula, but people had reports that the Forest Service road they were driving on, it was just, you couldn't see any of the dirt. It was just covered with butterflies. So that's our California tortoiseshell. Compton tortoiseshell. And I'll put these side by side in a second, but again, it's got some of those white spots here, but it's also got white spots in the hind wing and a little bit more coloration here, but then the border is very different, but then it's got these like chevrons in here. And so unless you're getting this confused with a comma, which is potential to do, as you will see, you're hopefully seeing that there are some very visible differences between our tortoiseshells here. And so again, the two up for comparison. This one, I think the telltale thing is that the California is largely an orange butterfly, where the Compton just has a lot more checkering to it in its appearance. Okay, this is where everyone take a deep breath and get ready for the commas, because this is a little more challenging for sure. But I've got a little trick later, something that I'm going to hand out, and we'll do it in a little bit, that is hopefully going to lift the fog if you are getting confused with these guys. So commas are also called angle wings because of the jagged edges of their wings. They can be really difficult to identify without getting a really close look or getting a picture or potentially capturing it. And I really don't expect you to walk away today knowing how to identify each of these four, because I always have to kind of brush up on it. I feel like by the end of the season, I know it, and then by the time next year comes around, I'm like, I can't remember. So they're not easy. Now we're finally getting to why they're called commas. If you see here, there's a comma shape on the wing, and this happens to be a satyr comma, and I'll see if I can play the video. They're amazing. When they land on a tree, the underside of their wing is so bark-like, they kind of disappear. But they'll give you a little flash of that orange every once in a while. And they will perch at times with their wings open, especially if it's cooler and they're trying to gather some sunlight. Oops, come on, there we go. And here's, for comparison, here's a green comma. Again, here's the comma shape on the underside of the wing. We're going to be identifying from the top side of the wings, but I wanted to throw this picture in because the green comma is the one that is pretty easy to identify from the underside of the wings, because you could see all this green shading in here, and that's where it gets its name. Very different from any of the other ones that we'll be talking about. But we are going to be looking at the top side of the wings, and so let's start with the green comma. Okay, so this is where some of the terms that I use, nobody else will be using. But the first thing I look for when trying to identify a comma is the L's. And what I mean by the L's is this L shape of spots right here and the backward L right here. What's going on right there? Let me forward this. I look at that spot at the bend of the L, at the 90-degree turn. What's going on there? You could see here there's a spot, but it's got a little baby spot too. So it's a double spot on the wing. And that's one thing for our commas we're going to want to look at. The next thing we look at are the borders to the wings. The green comma happens to have a really thick border. And then within that border, I wouldn't really call them chevrons. Sometimes they're like just little dots. But you can see those dots just at the edge of that border, and they stand out really prominently. They also have a little bit more going on in the hind wing here in terms of having some dots in the middle of the hind wing. But what I look at is right at that L, that spot right there. Kind of look at the border and then look at the hind wing lastly to kind of see what's going on there. But so that's our green comma. And I know I'm going through this relatively quickly, but you'll like what's coming up, I hope. The next one is the satyr comma. So first thing, let's look at the L there. It's got a double spot too, so that doesn't really help us tell one from the other. But then now let's look at the border of the wing. It's got a black border, but it doesn't really have much right here. And it's also got this kind of like white, I wouldn't call it like chevrons. They're not individual shapes. It's kind of like a smear of white that goes through here. So, okay, that's very different than the green comma. And then the one thing on this butterfly that stands out to me is if you look in the center of the wing here, that spot is really triangular. It's super symmetrical where the other butterflies don't tend to be. Let me go back to the green comma. You could see that's, it's triangular-ish, but it's not quite the same defined kind of triangle as you see on the satyr comma. So we look at the double spot, we look at the edge, and we look at the back wing. The aureus comma. Okay. Broken record here. Oh, look at that. Okay, that's got a double spot too. It's a little bit bigger double spot, but I wouldn't go on that. So it's got a double spot. That doesn't help us identify it from the other ones. Look at the edge of the wing. Here's those chevrons I was talking about. And so it's not a thick black border, but it's got a black border. And the thing I note about the chevrons is they're mostly separate from each other. They don't touch each other. They don't run into each other. And so that's what I'm kind of looking for there. The hind wing, they kind of have a little smudge there, but nothing really defined and nothing that stands out a lot. So that's your aureus comma. The hori comma. Let's go to our first thing, the L's. Look at that. No double spot. So out of the 4 commas, this one does not have a double spot. So if you look at that first off and you see one that doesn't have it, and I wouldn't say always, there's always some kind of variation potentially, but I think you can bet pretty much it's a hori comma. Look at the wings here. It's got a thinner black border up here. There are some chevrons on the top here, but at the bottom, those chevrons kind of mush together. You can still see their shapes, but they kind of squish together. And so that's definitely different than what we were just looking at with the aureus comma, where they're definitely separate. And then furthermore, on the hori comma, look at the hind wing. There's really nothing in that center to lower part of the hind wing, so it's pretty much just orange. And so this is when I asked for a couple volunteers to help pass something out. I didn't want you to have this before we got to this point in the presentation. This will help. I think we probably have, we'll just wait a minute for everyone, because this is great. So I will admit I love bugs, but I'm not a scientist. And so this year was the second year that I did this presentation for the Molly course. And when I was putting it together, I'm like, how do we really bring this home and figure out how to identify these things? And so Jen, our executive director, who's my wife, is the scientist. And she said, why don't you make an identification key? Does everybody have one to look at as we go through this? Okay, so why don't you make an identification key? And we gave it a shot, and it works. So I'm going to pull up the 4 different commas, and we're going to go through this. So if you look at the key, does it have a double spot? And again, nobody else is talking about, I don't think they're calling it a double spot. I don't know what, but that's what I call it. Does it have a double spot in the center of the forewing? So yes, 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 no. Okay, no, it's likely a hori comma. So you've got the hori comma. If they do, go to step number 2. Step 2, does it have a thick, dark border with yellowish spots within it? If you can say yes, and they all have a little black, but that's got a thick black border with yellowish spots in it. Yes, it's likely a green comma. If not, go to step 3. And then this one gets a little more complicated because we've got to separate 2 that are very similar. But does it have a lighter colored border to the wings with non-defined shapes in it? So yeah, it's got a lighter border to the back wings, and you really can't see any defined shapes there. Does the hind wing have a black triangular spot in the center? And that's why, to me, that one looks a lot more triangular, and this one really doesn't have anything. So if you're saying yes to both those things, it's a satir comma, and then by default, we've got our aureus comma. So if you can look at something through your binoculars, or if you can get a picture of it, and you don't remember, okay, who has the double spot, who doesn't, if you just fold this and stick it in your ID book, that will help, and it does make sense. And after a while, if you go out a lot, you'll know them right off the bat, and then if you're like me, you're going to forget it the next year when you start looking at butterflies again. So I hope, for a lot of you, that when I went through those commas at first, and I was like, oh my God, how the heck you're going to remember any of this? The key is you don't have to remember it. You've got the tools that can help you identify it. To me, the green comma is definitely the easiest. I mean, that one, there's no question about, but the others, you have to get a good look at it. And if you know what you're looking for, you've got a good shot. So that's it for our early season butterflies. But as I mentioned before, I wanted to throw in one extra at least. So by the time you hit late March, and once you get it to mid-April for sure, other butterflies start emerging into this mix. And so if you're relying on just seeing these 8, that goes out the window. The one I wanted to throw in as an extra is the Echo Azure. So this does not overwinter as an adult butterfly. They obviously overwinter in the chrysalis stage, but they emerge way sooner than any of the other blue butterflies. So if you're out on a walk in the next couple weeks and you see a blue butterfly, you can say pretty confidently without even looking at anything that it's an Echo azure, because there's no other blues out until probably almost mid-April. And with this year, I don't know, I wouldn't put any bets on that if it stays pretty warm. But so the Echo azure, you saw the picture of the, and I'll pull it up again, the Melissa blue with all those beautiful bright spots. The Echo azure it's not flashy. There's not a lot to it. What I look at in identification are these little like long squiggly lines here, and in general, they tend to be much lighter marked. And of course there's variation, so you can't always rely on that. But if you look at these, they're definitely not heavily marked butterflies. But once they fly, they're almost looking like any other blue butterfly that you're going to see. So in a nutshell, that's kind of our early season butterflies here in Montana. Here's again, just for comparison, like the Melissa blue and the Echo azure. The Melissa blues do start emerging early, so you could start probably seeing them in about mid-April, and they're usually done by the time you hit mid-June, and are replaced by some other blues that are quite as flashy but are gorgeous just the same. And I think that's my last slide. So I hope that this kind of strengthened your appreciation and understanding of, number one, how incredible these butterflies are that overwinter as an adult, and then just gave you kind of that base knowledge to start looking at what you need to focus on for identification. And then once all the other butterflies are out, there's some that are equally as complicated. So good luck with that. So that's it. So I'll hopefully be able to answer questions. Oh, the fringe around their wing here?
Or several of them.
Yeah, you could see how frilly. Actually, I don't know. Does anybody? I'm looking at staff members. So that fringiness to the wings here. I'm assuming it has something to do with their flight. Just because the air, it'll be very different than if it was just smooth. But I can't say I know what the purpose is or what it actually does. But good question. Yes.
I have a question if there are any studies on these species that do overwinter. If they're cold tolerant and we have warmer winters and they're active earlier, is there a concern that they may burn out their energy stores too soon?
No, that's a great question. I don't know of any studies that they've shown on butterflies, but I think from things that I've read, and it wasn't specific to butterflies, but when the temperature's warming up a lot sooner, and they've shown this in a lot of bee species, that you get a mismatch. And what I'm talking about are bees that are super specific to pollinating one kind of plant, and that plant is reliant on that bee. And I believe the bees take longer to develop. I hope I'm not screwing this up, but I think the plants leaf and they bloom earlier than the bees are. And so they miss, they used to be in sync, and calendar-wise, they're kind of missing each other. And I could see something like that if these butterflies are starting to emerge and only have a certain amount of energy to expend, and they're waiting for the plants to leaf out. But I don't know if the plants are going to start leafing out earlier too. So I haven't heard of any studies, but there's definitely concerns, and there's other studies that have shown that climate change is causing mismatches in terms of host species or like for pollination with specific pollinators and things like that. That's kind of scary to me. Other questions? Yeah.
Here in western Montana, what are their main predators?
I would say birds. A lot of times you'll see a butterfly that's got like a perfect chunk out of like two, both of its wings, or birds will eat a lot of them. But also I've seen, I don't know if everyone knows what a robber fly is. They're incredible. I mean, we should do a presentation on robber flies sometime. I mean, there's some that mimic a bumblebee that look exactly like a bumblebee, but they're incredibly agile predators on the wing. And I've seen them catch tons of things, including butterflies, and pretty sizable butterflies. So there are certain types of flies like that. There's birds that will eat them. And then I don't know who would be the biggest predator or having an impact, but there's also parasitic wasps that will lay an egg on the caterpillar, and their emerging young will essentially just eat the caterpillar alive. So there's parasitic wasps, which those help keep like the balance, as long as it's not a non-native species.
Do you know if there's certain birds that primarily depend on it as butterflies or food source?
None that I know of. But that being said, there are a lot of species, and it may not be butterflies, it might be moths, but there's a lot of species that solely feed their young caterpillars. And so they'll impact the butterfly population at a different part of the life cycle, so it's not just the adult. So yeah, a lot of them do get preyed on by, I would say birds are probably one of their biggest predators for sure, when you think about the larval stage too. Yes, Steve.
So you were talking about the lifespan of the adults, and some of them 1 to 3 weeks, and some of them 9 months. So are the ones that live 9 months, that's the adult overwintering, whereas the ones that are 1 to 3 weeks,
They're just, they're
pupal stage?
Yeah, well, no, that's the adult. Yeah, when I said 1 to 3 weeks, I should have clarified that. Thanks, because that's just referring to the adult stage. So from growing from like the egg to the adult probably takes closer to 2 months or something like that, or somewhere around there. But that's just the adult stage. But these 8 butterflies that can live that long, the only other butterflies that I know for an individual that will live that long are monarch butterflies that migrate down to Mexico and spend the winter in Mexico. But they're not in freezing temperatures, but they're finding temperatures to slow their metabolism down and just hang out. So they're not being active that whole time. But and again, I never say never about other things, because there's always other weird examples. But I mean, I know of these 8 species and other commas in the United States, and then the monarch as the butterflies that live a really long time, surprisingly long time.
So is it the same individual that's leaving north, going down to Mexico, coming back into monarch populations?
No, well, so when they leave, we'll just use the Mexico version, but there's the migration from the California coast. But the ones that leave Mexico, and I just saw reports that they're entering southern Texas right now, so they're starting to see monarchs. But they will essentially hopscotch north. So they'll lay eggs, and the adults will die, and then the next generation goes, and the next generation goes. And I think it's that 4th generation of the year that is, up potentially in Montana, but certainly for the eastern population, they're up in southern Canada and along the northern United States. And it's that one butterfly that is probably emerging in late August or maybe early September that goes all the way down and makes that huge flight to Mexico, just as that one. And that's the one that will live over through the winter if they're lucky, and then start that migration again in late February or early March, which is incredible. I mean, when you think of it's hard enough to live for 9 months, but they travel 3,000 something miles, which is just insane. Other questions or yes?
So sometimes, I know some years we've had snow start in late September, early October. Does that change anything regardless of how the butterflies migrate?
When we get an early snow or something like that? Well, so these butterflies, since they're equipped to handle those cold temperatures, I mean, it'll impact them in terms of they're just going to find a place to chill, literally chill out. They're just going to hang out until like it warms up. So it doesn't. I mean, it's what they're kind of made for. So it'll happen, and usually at that time of year we get a little cold spell, and then it warms up again, and then they'll be active like 2 days later when the temperatures are up again. So it doesn't cause a big disruption. I mean, they can handle it for sure without any trouble. If that answers the question. Yes.
Can you speak to the ways that, like, in our home landscape areas, we can help support the overwintering spaces?
Yeah, one thing that you'll see in a lot of catalogs, and I've seen in bird stores, they sell little butterfly houses, little boxes to put up. I've never heard anybody say that there's ever been a butterfly that goes in, and so don't buy those things because they're a complete waste. Hopefully nobody sells those in here. No. For the most part, these butterflies that we're talking about are not in the center of town. They're definitely in the riparian areas more. But they need, if somebody's got property and they're taking down snags and they're taking, it's like so much other wildlife. They need a dead snag. Like if it's got a cavity in it or if it's got loose bark it could squeeze under. They really need intact, vegetation. You walk around here and it's not like, there's not many places where we have a lot of dense leaf cover, but leaf cover is a good thing. So it's really like if you've got property, I would say let it be as wild as you tolerate because, natural conditions are what they're accustomed to. And, unfortunately, like right in town here, there's not much you can do to help these butterflies because I don't think, I've seen mourning cloaks in our yard. They tend to venture a little bit further, but they're certainly not like staying. They're just kind of passing through. So, yeah, I mean, if somebody has property, I would say, a lot of these, like if the property's in not good shape and you bought some property, planting like willows or trying to do some streamside revegetation if it's in bad shape, because that's, willows are good things, cottonwoods, nettles, and what else did I mention? There's a couple others. But, just trying to get as much native stuff that would be in a good, healthy riparian area would be the best thing. And I think, yeah.
Question. I always think of like buttercup flowers as like the first flowers of spring. Do these guys go on to buttercups or?
No.
Is that too early to start looking for butterflies when we start seeing buttercups?
No, I mean, actually, some people I've seen pictures of buttercups out already. But yeah, they're not focused on them. And I don't, honestly, I don't think I've ever seen, well, maybe it's because it's these butterflies are the ones that are out when the buttercups are really noticeable. I just don't think they utilize them as much. They're really looking for those salts and minerals and the sugars from the sap. So that's why the sap, dung, carrion, around puddles, you'll see and especially if it's just good and muddy where they're not going to sink in. I mean, there's so much minerals and stuff in the mud. I have seen like a Milbert's tortoiseshell feeding on a flower, late season after it had emerged, but it's actually kind of rare to see these even going to flowers. They really just don't bother with flowers.
My other question is, like you were saying, like some people tell you that they're up in northern Montana or wherever. Is there are people calling you all the time when they see butterflies and the 1-800 butterflies?
Yeah, no, we do get I don't know if everybody's aware of our What's Buzzin' email and Facebook posts that kind of show what's happening through. And, thanks to that, a lot of people do send pictures and send reports. And then, last year, it was just crazy how many people were calling about the California tortoiseshells. I mean, the first person was, I think she worked for the Forest Service, and she was up on the east side of Flathead Lake I can't remember the road that she was up, but she was just going on and on. And that's where she said like they didn't drive their car any further because they were going to kill like hundreds of butterflies, because there was a huge stretch of the road, and I don't know if it was because it was a little wet and they were going after the minerals, but she said there was thousands and thousands and thousands of butterflies there. She said she'd never seen anything like it. And that was the first call that we got, and then we got, you know, people would either call or send an email like almost once a week saying, oh my God, there's so many California tortoiseshells. So we, since there were so many that overwintered, we're probably going to see a ton as soon as the weather really starts warming up. And we may see huge, huge numbers again this year, but eventually they're going to be depleting the host species and it's going to catch up. So they usually, like with these massive eruptions, they get maybe 2 to maybe 3 years where the numbers are really huge, and then they're just going to drop. So it'll eventually balance out. But for now, like this early spring, we're going to see a lot of California tortoiseshells for sure. Any other questions? Well, I hope this helps. And you know, if you're not working, yeah, get out tomorrow. I think it's supposed to get a little cooler by the weekend, but the next 2 days are going to be prime. So thanks for coming.